Alright guys, welcome to another video. A lot of people have asked me the question, is it better to use CorelDRAW or Photoshop? Photoshop has its strengths and CorelDRAW has its strengths. And I think the long and short answer to that question is whichever works best for you. But we in our place always use CorelDRAW. But if you're using Photoshop, you do have a strength that CorelDRAW people don't have. And that is being able to create endless designs using different softwares online that most people don't have access to that use CorelDRAW. And if you're using CorelDRAW, you also do have some strength that people that use Photoshop don't have. So let's just quickly boil it down. When it comes to printing, one thing is important. What size are you trying to print? Now, the size matters. So let's say, for instance, you are trying to print 100 foot by 20 feet. If you do that on Photoshop, for instance, let me open Photoshop. This is not Photoshop, by the way. This is a free alternative of Photoshop. So for those of you who don't have Photoshop, you can use Photopea. It's at photopea.com. If you look on here, you see it's an online version of Photoshop and it works almost like what Photoshop does and you don't have to pay a penny. So let's say, for instance, you are designing 100 by 20 feet, and let's say this is 100 by 20 feet. The challenge with Photoshop is that you have to design in the size that you are printing. That is the first challenge you're going to have with Photoshop. Why? Because Photoshop is a bitmap software, so which means that it already pegs the size of your design to the size of the output. Because if you don't design in the size you want, you are not going to get the image to be sharp for printing. So the first challenge you are going to have with using Photoshop is a heavy file size. And that's why people who use Photoshop, you notice that when you are designing a Photoshop file, you see 50 gig, 40 gig, 30 gig, especially when you are going to those high sizes. The challenge is because you have to design in the size that you want. But you see, let's come back to CorelDRAW. The difference in CorelDRAW and Photoshop is that Photoshop is a bitmap software while CorelDRAW is a vector-based software. What CorelDRAW gives you is a vector file. And what are vector files? Vector files are mathematically driven files. In other words, a vector file is scalable. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's say, for instance, you want 100 feet by 20 feet. You can just come here to inches and say 100 by 20. So now you designed it as 100 by 20 inch. Let's now draw a text in 100 by 20 inch. So we'll do, let's say we just type a text like say 100. And then we scale that file size up. Now look at the file size at 100 by 20 feet. Can you see that all the edges are sharp? That is the beauty of using CorelDRAW or bitmap softwares. Now, let's go back to Photopea and do the exact same things. So, in Photopea now, we'll then click on text, right? And then type, hold on, so I'm type 100. Now, I'm going to press this. Now, I will scale this up. Now, look at me zooming the same text. Look at the way it looks. So this is a challenge that people have with bitmap softwares. If you are designing with Photoshop, for you to be able to get a scale of this magnitude, you have to design in the size of that magnitude. That's the main challenge. That's the only challenge that you have. Photoshop is going to create a good design, beautiful designs that CorelDRAW may not be able to imagine, but CorelDRAW is scalable. So which means it is not a bitmap. It's a mathematical calculation of what you are designing. And so because the mathematical calculation of your design, it is able to scale up bigger than what you currently have because it's just basically mathematics that is on your screen. It is not the actual pixels. Whereas in Photoshop, it's the actual pixels that you have to work with. So you have to design based on the pixel count that you need. So if you want 100 feet by 20 feet, you have to put 200 feet by 20 feet worth of pixels into the data. Otherwise, the job will not be sharp. Whereas in CorelDRAW, because it's mathematically driven, you can be able to use a smaller size to approximate for a larger size. And that's why people, when they use CorelDRAW, they have the opportunity of scaling, using a small file size to scale at a big size. Look at my zoom angle. My zoom is already at 1892. If you look up here, my zoom is already 1892. And if we come to Photo P, I'm not even sure I have that much zoom going on. If you look at my zoom factor here, my zoom factor is, I wish there's a way I could see the zoom factor here. But if you find the zoom factor of this particular thing you have done in Photo P now, it will not be as high as that which you have in CorelDRAW. Yet in CorelDRAW, you can zoom far more higher, which means you can use small sizes to approximate for big jobs. So your 200 feet, for instance, your 100 feet by 20 feet, for instance, you can actually design it as 2 by 1 inch. Or you can design it as 10 by 2 inches. And then when you take it to the press, you can escalate that size to whatever size you want. There's, however, a small catch. So if you are using, say for instance, you want to do 100 feet by 20 feet, and then you decide to do 10 by 2 inches, while that is going to work with every file that is a vector on your design, you have to be careful with every bitmap that is in your design. Do you understand what I'm saying? So all the bitmaps in your design will always behave like bitmaps. So they will be in the same density that they were pixel-wise as you got them. So when you know you want to design higher sizes, I won't always recommend that you do 10 inch by 2 inch. You can do something like 10 feet by 2 feet to approximate for 100 by 20. Whatever you have in that sizes will still work right. But the reason Photoshop is not advisable for printing is because it is a bitmap software. What do we suggest? Well, if you want to use something from Adobe, I would even suggest you use Adobe Illustrator, because Adobe Illustrator is the exact equivalent of CorelDRAW. Both of them are vector-based software, and both of them work excellently well. So if you want to use something from Adobe that has a lot of resources online that you can just change the template and work with, use Adobe Illustrator, not Photoshop, for those designs. But when it comes to screen-based designs, or if you have the high computing power that can take whatever size you're working with, then you can use Photoshop. Some advertising houses use Photoshop by default, but most advertising houses that I know in this country, in this Nigeria, I don't know where your country is, will always use CorelDRAW. So that's kind of like it. Which software should you use? I would always pick CorelDRAW or Adobe Illustrator any day for designs that require large and huge scale, right? Because they are more scalable than Photoshop. So I don't know if that has helped you. If it has, I want you to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, turn on the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye. Take care.